Okay, hello all, welcome to another video. This video is going to talk about credibility of sources, because when you're finding a source for your essays, it's really important to find information that's credible. If you provide information that's not credible, you're going to also yourself seem to your readers as not a reliable source, and nobody really wants that. So what does a credible source even mean? When I say credibility sources, I'm probably going to say mean something like trustworthy, so somebody that you and other people can trust. You can count on that source to be accurate in the most non-biased way possible. And you, as a writer, you do not want to provide inaccurate or highest bias sources in your essay. If you do, it's again going to make you look untrustworthy to your readers. And you don't want to give up that ethos. Again, that ethos meaning credibility that we learned about during the rhetorical analysis essay. So sites you don't want to use. I know a lot of English teachers, they don't use Wikipedia. Wikipedia can be helpful when you're first looking something up. So if you don't know what a word or something is, or you want to find out what happened to that one actor that was like on Star Wars in the 90s and you don't know what happened to them, look that up. That's fine for the initial information. However, don't use Wikipedia in your essays. Wikipedia changes. Anybody can go on there and change it. So it's fine for the little things, but once you kind of find that initial information, really try to find more credible information that's not just Wikipedia. And a lot of people also think that all .org sites are good. That's not true, because Wikipedia is actually a .org site. It's actually a non-profit site, which when I first learned that, it just kind of blew my mind. So don't necessarily use Wikipedia, and just because it's a .org or .edu or .gov site doesn't necessarily just mean that it's credible. In addition, just because you find a .com site doesn't necessarily mean that it's credible or it's not credible. So you want to make sure you're analyzing other aspects of the sources you find beyond just what the ending is, like .com or .edu. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to talk about some other aspects of sources that you want to look at and analyze as you're writing. So for every source that you want to put in your essay to analyze its credibility, look up each of these aspects and really think about if they measure trustworthiness. One aspect you want to look at is the publisher. Are they credible? What makes them credible? If they have a track record of giving accurate information and hiring educated authors. This can be complicated. There's some, like the New York Times. I've read a lot of wonderful essays or articles by them. I've also read articles that aren't as biased. So usually you want to stay away from the opinion articles, right? So like the articles that are more opinionated. Most news sources like the New York Times are going to have New York Times opinion or CNN opinion or Fox News opinion. Try and stay away from those, because those are more likely to be biased than just literally somebody's opinion. But if they're just providing the news, providing something else, that's going to be ideally less biased. But so New York Times, maybe accurate for news, maybe not as accurate for opinion. And that changes over time. So maybe a source started out being more credible, it became less credible over time, or vice versa. The author is really important to look up. You want to, whenever you have an article, you want to literally just search them. Do a quick Google search. That's all you need to do. You can usually find just a small paragraph of their information, or maybe they have their own website if you're lucky. Look up their education, their experience. What would this source know? Do they have training in that area? Do they have a job title that would indicate that knowledge? I would prefer having education or experience, because credibility can happen with both. So if they have education in that specific area, you also want them to have that education or experience in that field. Okay, so if maybe they have, I remember one time I did an exercise with a class, and it was a literature class, and they were looking up this article that was about Shakespeare, and they looked at the author. And the author had a higher degree, but it was in computer science. And so they knew computer science. It doesn't mean nobody can't write about Shakespeare, but there's a certain level of knowledge and expertise that somebody gets by having a master's degree or a PhD that somebody else isn't going to have by not having those years and years and years of experience and education. So they either want to have some job, maybe they actually have a personal experience So like if you're writing your essays and you have a personal experience, that can be some sort of evidence if you tie it back to your thesis and to your main point. But if, say, somebody else has that personal experience or that experience is tied to a job, have they been working in that field for a long time? So ideally, they have one. If they have both, that's even better. But they should have some type of background that shows that they have training in that area and they are knowledgeable saying what you want them to say and to show your readers. I'm going to skip this here for a second. I'm coming back to it. But one aspect you may have heard in the past is age. So how old is the source? A general rule, I don't even follow this one necessarily too much, is like 10 years from the time that your essay, from the time you are. So it's 2021. So generally finding something between 2011 and 2021. That highly depends on what you're looking for and what field you're looking at. So if you're looking at something in the sciences, so the medical field or maybe psychology, probably you want something that's sooner, or even technology with computers. Those fields change really quickly. 10 years is going to be really outdated in that field, in those fields. So you want to find something that's a little bit newer. With literature, you could find something from the 1950s about Shakespeare that's hypothetically correct because he lived centuries ago. You probably want something more updated than that, but hypothetically it could be correct. But the fields change, conversations change, you want something a little bit more updated. Most things that you're going to find are somewhere in the middle in between that. So it could be, if you're looking at something from the 80s or the 90s, it could be that that person is just somebody who's a pioneer of that field, somebody who is looked up to, highly regarded, and that information is going to be really credible. If it's just somebody who's not that, maybe find something newer. And so it really depends on the topic, it depends on the context of it, but generally you want to find something that's newer versus something that's really old. And if you are finding something that's a little bit older, having a good reason for doing so in the context of your essay and that source. Other thing you want to look at is primary versus secondary source. A primary source is usually going to be your first person source. So say, for example, you're looking at a news article and somebody, the author of the news article interviewed somebody. They interviewed an author, okay, and they're giving their account of whatever they're talking about. If you want to use the quote that they use, the article you're looking at is going to be a primary source, a first person source. But the quote that they use from the other author, that's a secondary source because you have to go through this other author to learn what they've said. So I always suggest using first person sources because you, as the author of your essay, are able to analyze the quote that you want and look at in the context of the original article. So if you want to look at maybe if somebody's being quoted from another source, I would always suggest trying to find that information from an original text from that person's mouth, okay, or their typewriter. When I say typewriter, from their computer. I don't know why I said typewriter. I'm tired, but you can definitely think about that. So always try to find that information firsthand from the author. If you can't, then I would say you can use that information secondary, but it's always better to have that primary source. You can also analyze how the source is written. So if they're providing outside sources that also only rely on their expertise. So if they're using outside other people that are also credible, that's good, because if an author only uses their own word, does that mean that they think that there's nobody else that can back them up? If there's nobody else that can have evidence to suggest what they're saying, are they actually true? Are they right? Is that going to be credible? Is it edited? Are there grammatical errors? Has it been revised? That's also good. Try to avoid like blogs that do that and whatnot. So make sure it looks revised. It looks legit. And it's the sort. After all of that, okay, all these are good to talk about any source you're using. So any source that you want to put in your essay, you want to ask all of these questions and analyze that, and then you can think, yes, it's credible because. Then you want to ask yourself, how is it relevant to your research? Why does this source matter to your essay? Is it relevant? Sometimes as you're writing a paper, the source becomes irrelevant over time. I've had so many essays I've written where I actually thought that a source was going to be a gold mine. This is going to be my saving grace. This is going to be everything I needed. And as I'm writing, it ends up being the opposite. And that's okay. Sometimes as maybe your thesis changed, the purpose of your essays change, and you need to change that. So as you're writing, if you find out that a source that you once originally thought was relevant is no longer, it's okay to delete it. Delete it from the essay, and also remember to get rid of it from your works cited page too, because you only want to have the sources in your essay and your works cited page. But asking yourself as you're finding the information, how is this relevant to your essay? Because as your reader is writing your paper, you want to find something that makes sense, that's going to be evidence to support what you're talking about. So if you have any questions about credibility sources, or if you want to email me to find out if you have any questions about that, please let me know, and I'll be happy to have more. Otherwise, have a great day.